All right, Luz. First question is, how would you describe your leadership communication style to be? Authoritarian, democratic, or laissez-faire?
Wow, that's. He said I won the shock factor, so that's why he. I'm like, don't send me the questions. I can deal with this. No, I'm absolutely more democratic, and I appreciate the different opinions. I've learned to actually embrace them. Being always kind of like the minority voice in the bigger group, I've learned to hear different opinions and learn to live with them, even if they're not necessarily the ones I appreciate. So I learned that for me, the democratic process, it tends to be a more effective way to lead and get results.
Okay. What has been your greatest leadership challenge in the Senate?
Patience. I think being in a position of leadership, the biggest challenge is getting what you want at the timing that you want it, and what you learn in I think in the legislative process more than many other maybe political arenas is this is a compromise process. You really, it's not your way or the highway. Some people may have that ability because they may have the votes, or they just they're in a majority place. But what I've learned is patience pays a lot at the end, and for me, just being able to wait the right time and the right moment, and persistence, right? I mean, you never let go of what you feel passionate about, but it may not be the right time right now. Right. And I learned to just be patient, and that's probably in my personal life as well. It's been a skill that I continue to, one of the challenges in my life, but I think it's probably the best skill I could learn, and will continue to work towards being as patient as possible.
Okay.
You can ditch those sub-questions.
Got it. How do your constituents engage with you other than the ballot box?
Oh, I have, I think email and phone calls. In our website, we have a very friendly website, and my cell phone is on the website. Wow. So there's pros and cons. It's a small, our districts are relatively small. We represent 100,000 people. Mm-hmm. We have very low voting participation in the state. So, most Utahns actually do not engage in their civically or in politics. But when people want to talk to their elected officials, they know how to find you. And so phone and email tends to be a great place. And I attend community council. Salt Lake City has a very well-structured community council system. West Valley, which is the other city I represent, doesn't have that. Okay. So I think that I get more interaction with Salt Lake City just by default on their community council process, more community engaged. West Valley is a little more difficult. I sometimes have to be more active on West Valley, and but I also live in my district, of course, but I participate in community events in my district. I shop in my district. Mm-hmm. I shop at the West Valley Fair, Valley Fair, and some people don't do that, and I think that helps a lot because you're there, you're engaging with your constituents or your neighbors. Like you go to church there, and they know you, so I think that helps a lot.
I think that answers.
Yeah, that answers the next question as well. So, can you name a person who has had a tremendous impact on you as a leader? Maybe someone who was a mentor to you. Why and how did this person impact your life? And how has their leadership style inspired your abilities?
So I have a theory in life. So my theory is I get to have little angels placed in my life that open doors at different phases in my life. So I can give you, like, when I graduated from school, who was a little angel that opened, and they really become mentors at the end of the day. But there's one, a good mentor, and someone that I have a lot of respect and appreciation because it was kind of like the person that introduced me to policy. And I was able to really appreciate policy from a more academic perspective as well as and practical. And that's Judy Hillman. Judy Hillman was my supervisor, my boss for a couple of years when I worked at Utah Issues, the Center for Poverty Research and Action, and it was a very well-known nonprofit organization that did advocacy work for low-income families and individuals in the state of Utah. And I met her in a Department of Health meeting as we were trying to bring more cultural competency components to the state, and she asked me, she's like, hey, we hardly have any minorities engaged in this type of conversations. Do you want to come to the Capitol and testify on this issue? And I was like, the Capitol? I'm like, I'm sorry, is that open to regular people? They're like, yes, yeah, that's the people's home. And I'm like, oh, well, So I started working with her, and we actually started working, getting grants to fund a a health disparities piece within Utah Issues, and I ended up running that program with them. But through this process, she taught me how to testify in committee, how to talk to legislators, how not to ever be afraid of talking to an elected official. I mean, she really told me, like, no, they are there because people elect them. You're supposed to be communicating with them. There was always this vision like, oh, well, we'll never reach them. And Judy was able to put that in perspective, and she's a great writer, so it was very helpful for someone that has English as their second language to have someone help them navigate a lot of the grant writing, and because writing is not my strength by no means, and she was very helpful in that process. And when we were writing position papers or fact sheets or whatever the case was, she was very helpful. So she's continues to be a good friend, and I see her as one of the most important mentors and individuals that I've seen. I've also learned of her weaknesses, right? I mean, so part of leadership is learning strengths and weaknesses, and I've seen her assess her own weaknesses and get help from other people in those weakness areas.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was instrumental. So I know where my strengths and weaknesses are, and I know the type of individuals I need to be surrounded by to be effective. And that was something she taught me because she did it firsthand, and I appreciated that part.
Okay. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I really like
In what ways would you say that being in a position of leadership influences how you act?
There is a sense of, so you don't think all the time, 24/7, like, oh, I'm in a position of leadership, right? But I think you learn with time that what you say, and it's hard for me because I have a big mouth, so that's why I don't do Twitter. I try to stay away from Facebook because probably, there's times where I say stuff that I probably shouldn't be saying, and I express all my feelings in a way that have got me into trouble more than once. So you've learned to at least think twice, and I think you should always think twice before you say something. It's a matter of like just having a good interpersonal relationship, and so forth with everyone. So I think now also my divorce probably helped me through that process, right? I mean, just you learn that sometimes you have to hold back and think and rethink what you're trying to say. And being in a position of leadership, you have to think more than once because people are watching you, and it's not only who doesn't like you, but it's also the people that follow you and have some respect for you. You don't want to lose that respect from them. And respect is earned. You just don't get it because of your position. You earn it because of your work. Yeah. So I've learned even in my personal relationships to hold back sometimes. And I think I'm hoping that will make my second marriage a more, a better marriage. And I certainly am putting that in practice with my children, my husband, and everything that I'm trying to do is, I do feel passionate. Maybe I need to go and breathe about this and come back. And at the legislature, you do it. I mean, 45 days where, and I see it all the time, that you get quotes from individuals, elected officials, and you're like, what were they thinking? The problem is you are probably tired, passionate in the moment, and you don't think. I mean, just say it. You're like, oh, that came out of my mouth. It's like, yeah, that did. And, I was like, I wasn't thinking out loud, but I guess it is out loud now. And I feel bad because some of them, I'm sure they didn't mean it that way, or, they were, you have to see the whole content of the conversation or the, whatever was happening in that committee hearing or that discussion of that bill. But you just say it, and now you're accountable and responsible for those words. And I think what you learn in leadership is accountability.
Okay. I didn't relate to that. Wait a minute. You're in the Senate minority leadership. How does that influence how you work with other Democrats?
There's not that many of us, so we actually, it's interesting because I've learned from, for example, my husband that came from a legislature where there were way more Democrats, and he was a legislator himself, and their interactions versus us that were 5, right? I mean, it's almost like a family. We're all here in this part of the Capitol, and so what I've learned is that because we're such a small group, our leadership style is to protect each other and be more, help each other. It's there's dissonance, there's disagreements like everything else, but we actually sometimes make decisions to just help you and protect our colleagues in our caucus, and then go after have a conversation. And that's a very unique relationship. For example, listening to what other caucuses take place, and some of my colleagues in other legislatures, they have their own, fights. And I see, for example, in the majority here, they're, on the Republican side, they kill each other in their caucuses. With us, you don't see that. We kind of like say, okay, we'll support each other. We may have to have a conversation because there may be disagreements, but we come ahead and just try to help each other as much as we can because of the small numbers. And I think that's unique because of our numbers.
Now, does that style or that kind of relationship influence your relationship with the majority party?
Not really. I think the majority party here in our case, because there's I think this is a study about itself, and maybe someone should write a paper about this, is the fact that they have such a huge power. They have their own, dissonance, and they have like 3 different caucuses within their caucus. So to them, their power is so big that they can really just dismiss us 100% and move on. And they do that probably most of the time.
Just out of hand.
Yeah, just, it's kind of like the default. It's like, well, I'm sorry, 5 out of 29. Yeah, some of them I think care just because of their personalities and the type of individuals they are. And I would say that about the president. I mean, President Niederhauser there's some sense of justice, almost like, okay, we need to include you guys because you guys are part of the Senate. I don't know that everybody else feels that way. I think many of them will say, hey, let's just run the meetings even if they're not here.
Huh.
And, that's, I think, unfortunate, because what it is, it just shows that one group in power, when they have that much power, can really becomes like, shape that whole conversation and process. Not all of them are like that, and I'll disclose that. But like I said, I mean, we are lucky to have in this case President Niederhauser, where he's allowed to have more conversations, more process, more. He will come and report to us. I mean, something that we didn't see before, and that has helped us at least be engaged in some of the conversations. But at the end, I mean, let's be clear: a lot of those decisions, very important decisions, are made behind doors in the majority room.
Of course. What is your view on growing minority groups and underprivileged classes in Utah, and how should or could they be more involved?
That's like the $1 million question, the $1 billion
Right.
question. And I'll tell you this: this week was kind of like relevant. One, we had Chuy was running for mayor in Chicago and put Emmanuel in a difficult place. This was a Latino, former state senator, they don't call them city council members. They have like a different name for their positions. But, it was nationally for Latinos. It was like the race everybody was followed, right? I mean, here you have Emmanuel, former chief of staff for the president. And the Chicago politics is like 180, right? I mean, they still have mafias over there, and like gangsters and scary stuff over there. So this guy, with 1/10 of the money Emmanuel had, really put him through a difficult, primary process and so forth. And what was sad is Chicago has the numbers in Latinos to actually take on a whole, race. And he lost, and then the loss was bad. I mean, he obviously had way more money, like a lot of money, and President Obama, endorsing him and visiting Chicago just to support his race. But it was sad. I mean, my family were sitting and we were watching this, and I'm like, wow, I mean, it was so close, right? I mean, these minority groups are becoming the majority in some places. They're so not represented at all. And I think at the end that will have an effect on the way communities grow and strengthening economies and the future of our communities and the nation and so forth. And I find it unfortunate, because if we don't empower those groups, that will in the very near future will be the majority. It will have an impact on everybody else. So I always tell people, it's not even about what's right or wrong. It's not about social justice anymore. It's about what your future will look like in your kids' future, right? So if you're not part of those groups, they're the vast majority in your children's schools. I'm concerned about them not performing well in school, right? I mean, we live in a community. You don't live in isolated little silos. I mean, we live in communities, and we share, the decisions and how the community looks. And so if you don't have an educated workforce in 10, 15, 20 years from now, it's all going to impact everybody. Us meaning, I look at all of you, and you guys are probably in all 30s, mid-30s or late 30s. I'm thinking that's all of us and I'm concerned about my Social Security and retirement. And if we're not educating a workforce and having good qualified individuals that have been integrated and can actually participate in the process, our future doesn't look that good. And we're not going to be able to sustain it. And our kids are not going to be able to sustain it. And, we need everybody else to be part of the solution. And it should be a very selfish way of saying we want everyone included, everyone participating, and somehow people still don't get it. And that's frustrating and scary. Because those groups, whether you're part of a minority group or not, whatever, you define yourself as, everybody else needs to be part of the solution. We're not doing a good job in acknowledging all the disparities that they face just by the default of being part of those minority groups. So we talked about, for example, children that couldn't access preschool. And, maybe for our children that we're sitting here, all of us that are, educated, had college, degrees, our kids have had books in their homes and they know how to read a book even by the time they go to preschool. We have kids that don't have preschool because we don't believe in full day kindergarten even in the state of Utah. They enter first grade and they still don't know how to open a book. We have kids that are still opening the books backwards. They don't know how to open a book because they never had a book read to them or, at home. And to think about that disparity, they already are 2-3 years behind. And we are not going to be able to bring them up to speed so they can compete in a global market or even here. So, the concerns are huge in terms of integrating those families and communities because at the end, it will have an impact on everybody else.
How many constituents, lobbyists, advocates do you engage with in an average session?
Oh, so our sessions are kind of like, most sessions in hormones, like all crazy because we have 45 days, very intense, they're very long days. And you average, you can get anything from 300 to 500 emails a day. Mostly from, just constituent base. Your lobbyists are permanently here. Those registered lobbyists are 24/7 at the Capitol, and they're just waiting for you to be, either walking in and out of a committee or, and we have a very limited number of staff, and that's very unique to Utah. So we have to deal with a lot of that ourselves. So what you usually see in other legislatures of like 3 layers of staff before they can get to the elected official, in our case is us. Actually, our staff is our laptop and one intern that we get assigned from a university. They're they're well-trained interns, by the way. They're not just like they take a class and everything. But you really do rely on them 100%. So your interaction is your constituents on issues, whether it's the bills that you're working on, constituents on the bills that you may be running. So whatever you're running on, you have groups of individuals that are just surrounding you on those issues, plus the lobbyists on every other piece of legislation, which in average we review about 1,000 bills in a session in 45 days. And then you have the budget process, which to me is one of the most, if not the most important thing we do in the state legislature. We balance the budget every single session. Most people don't think about budget when they think about the legislature. They think more about bringing laws and, killing laws or passing stupid laws, right? Because we do that every year. But we balance a budget, and that's the budget of everything that we, state government in this great state. So we do all that in 45 days with thousands of people interacting with you in that process. So I would say in the thousands for sure.
You answered. Okay, and among those, how many of those relationships would you qualify as quality relationships, sort of going beyond surface?
I think the ones the biggest ones that you get to, and I think you get to appreciate it because you actually end up becoming friends, is whatever bills you're working on. So when you work on a bill, it requires you to work with those individuals. Not only the first aid is the attorney that is drafting the bill for you, because we obviously have, qualified attorneys drafting bills, and you become almost like, it's a nightmare of a relationship because, you're back and forth and like, I don't like this word and this is not what I want. And the attorney says, well, if you go this route, it's unconstitutional. Everything that you can potentially see on a bill, that relationship with that staff person is very close. So what usually happens is legislators work on issues and they become kind of like experts on areas, and that's usually on their whatever their professional area is. And then you see them just working with many of those same attorneys through many, many years of their service. Mm-hmm. and then you have whoever advocacy group or, interest groups are, supporting or against that bill, because you also become very close to the people that don't like your bill, because you're trying to meet their, well, A, listen to their issues, one, and B, maybe meet somewhere in the middle where everybody could be happy. I mean, I think most legislators want that happy middle. I don't think they like that, oh, well, they're the evil people, I don't want them here. I mean, some of them do, but most of the legislators want that happy middle. So I would say those will be your biggest kind of like quality of relationships or stronger relationships. And then you have, and on the appropriation process, you kind of like sometimes may want to champion an issue because you listen to a testimony of anything on an issue, and that has happened to me before where I listening and I'm like, what, how can we miss this part? And you can like get passionate and get on this issue, carry and champion the issue, even though it wasn't necessarily something you were familiar with as of 3 weeks ago or whatever.
Right.
All right.